Today, I am very excited to have Travis Krause presented today, and there are a couple of reasons why. One, Travis has got a ton of great things to talk about, and he spends a lot of time dealing with our customers and thinking about their challenges and opportunities and that sort of thing. Travis is a super smart guy that's been doing this for a long time. I have really enjoyed getting to know him over the years, and I think more of you need to see his work because it's pretty darn cool. We are going to talk today about a very important topic. I'm going to let him really jump into it, but one of the worries that we have with high prices is that we see some inflation in our costs. And I think we are seeing that all over the place. I drove by the gas station this morning on the way home from school or from taking the kids to school, and diesel's over $5 a gallon. So we have real price pressure that's coming to us, sort of foisted on us from other, and then we have decisions we've made in our own businesses that are increasing our costs. And I think as we ride around here at the top of the market, it's real easy to get sloppy and have things get away from us. And unfortunately need to have a wake up call come when prices go the other direction. So with that, I'm going to encourage you all, please, if you have questions, interrupt us as we go. Happy to sort of talk about things. And then we'll have time for more questions and discussions when we get done. So with that, Travis Krause, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Let me make sure I'm sharing my screen correctly here and go into present mode. All right, does that look right, John?
Got it. Yeah, awesome.
Just a slide?
Yep. Leaner by
Okay,
design.
cool. So, if you've been on a lot of these webinars, Michaela's done an awesome job recently with like the team of reports and helping build the financial literacy. So when her, John, and I were talking about what do we want to talk about on the next webinar, I foolishly brought up, well, we should talk about cost controls because of the macroeconomic pressures out there. And John and Michaela both said, well, you should do the talk, Travis. And so I dug myself into this hole, on accident here. But I am excited to be here talking to you today. I know you all enjoy hearing from Michaela. She presents awesome and has a much better voice than myself for this type of stuff, but I'm going to do my best to walk you through this. Considering the topic, one of the things that came to my mind as I was developing the presentation was the lean business principles. And it was something that I came across probably about 10 to 12 years ago through a book that I'll talk about in a minute. And I thought, I want to challenge everyone today with some new ideas and not just the same old stuff we've heard about controlling costs, right? And so a little bit of this is new idea. I'm going to do my best to help tie it into ranching. And so we were going to jump into it, both feet here. So this is the team of reports that Michaela's been talking about a lot in these webinars recently. We work with a P&L, balance sheet, and a cash flow, so often called the statement of cash flows. Just for to keep this to a broad audience here, these three reports effectively tell the complete financial story of your ranch or your business, right? And it's pretty self-explanatory by looking at the slides here. The P&L focuses on our revenue and expenses, balance sheet, assets, liabilities, equity, and cash flow pretty much speaks for itself. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today is mainly focusing on this lean framework and then walking away with these actionables. In other words, how do we audit our COGS and overheads and how to benchmark your costs? And then how do we go about building controls that actually stick with us, right? Because one of the hard things that we have is we implement these amazing systems in ranching or any other business and they don't stick. So, one of the things that I wanted to say is like, how often have we seen this headline in the news here, right? And it's sort of interesting because we're at this incredibly high point in the market in the livestock business in particular, yet we see in the news headlines people are going broke, right? And so one of the things that John and I and others have seen, looking, that are fortunate enough to look at lots of P&Ls and balance sheets and cash statements, is the people that do well regardless of the market know how to run a good, lean, frugal operation, right? They control their costs to a T. And so we have to understand that if we're not willing to put in the work on the costs, that the macro environment is going to do it for us, right? So I'm calling this, for today's argument's sake, anyways, sort of why managing your costs is that number one lever to pull right now. And so, input costs are rising. Like John said, we've got elevated interest rates. They're not nearly what they've been historically. They could go there, right? There's a lot of people on this call who experienced 18% interest rates back in the 80s, right? Margins are getting squeezed really hard on livestock, but they're even more so on crops, right? Like there are a lot of people in our business that crop margins have been really bad for 3 years in a row. And this year, looking at the futures and the input costs is not looking too good either. So, the idea here is the ones that come out ahead aren't going to be the ones that waited to ask these questions. And then the core question that I want you to think about during the presentation today, and this is putting on like that CFO cap, when you're in your business, is when I look at my costs or any action that I'm doing in my business, we have to ask ourselves this definitive question about what is this returning and is that return acceptable, right? And so I want you to be thinking about that as we move throughout the presentation today. So lean is a system. I first came across lean in a book called The Lean Farm by Ben Hartman. It was at that time, it was, sort of something that just came across my desk, so to speak. This was probably, like I said, about 10 years ago for me. Ben Hartman, interestingly, was running a small market garden on the East Coast, and he put the lean principles to work in his market garden, which, and there's a lot of themes in that book that would resound with all of us in this meeting today, where you see examples of these market gardeners that are making, $100,000 on 1 acre. And Ben just couldn't figure it out, right? He's like, I have no idea how these people are doing it. And he put the lean principles to work, and lo and behold, he found it. So, real quick background on lean: it was developed by Toyota in post-war Japan. So, resources were scarce, right after World War II. Waste wasn't an option. Toyota engineers essentially built a production system around this one obsession. And the obsession was eliminating anything that doesn't add value to the customer. And it actually ended up working so well that lean has been adapted across manufacturers, hospitals, and businesses just totally worldwide. And the cool thing is the principles translate directly to any operation where inputs, labor, and time are money, right? So that's virtually every single business that we can think of. So,
Just a quick side
yes.
note. I'll put a link here in the chat. There's a wonderful book called The Toyota Way.
Yep.
That is a very easy reads, good audio book. You can listen to it. It gives you a real bunch of background and then some specifics on the systems of lean. And there are a bunch of other names for lean. And I'm not going to draw a blank on a bunch of them, but Scrum, which we've talked about before, is one of the offshoots of lean. So all of these
Right.
things kind of tie together.
Yep. Absolutely. So, a quick overview of the five lean principles. And what I'm going to do is while you're looking at this slide, I'm going to sort of read you through like some examples of each of these. Because, like I said, what I really want to do is be able to help you translate this over to ranching or farming, right? And so, like the first one being defining value. So, as an example, the market pays for pounds of beef, right? Or the market pays for uniform calves at weaning, as another example, right? It doesn't necessarily always pay us for the extra 30 days that we put them on expensive creep feed, as an example, right? Trying to add weight that perhaps the market may have discounted already, right? Because there was no value of gain, if that probably resounds with a lot of you, right? And so we have to understand that when we are defining the value is defined by the buyer, not the producer, right? So the essential question that we need to be asking ourselves there when we are defining value is, are the inputs that we're putting into this, so the expenses, right, the costs, are they aligned to what the market will actually pay me for? In other words, reward me for, right? The next one being like mapping the value stream. Okay. So let's think about the first one, adding value, value adding. We're talking about breeding. So in other words, genetics, right? Gestation, perhaps, calving, nutrition that drives average daily gain, weaning, right? These are things that add real value. The next one is which ones are necessary but non-value adding. So that could be something like vaccinations are necessary for most people, anyways. Preg checking, record keeping. The market doesn't pay extra for these things necessarily, but you can't skip them either. Okay. And then we get into like pure waste. Okay. And that's a good example that I was thinking of earlier for that would be a calf gets treated for pink eye. No record was kept. And 2 weeks later, a different employee goes out in the feed yard, treats the same calf again because there was no way to know that it was already treated. The second treatment cost was pure waste, right? And this is just a very basic example, but it added nothing to nothing that the first treatment didn't already do. So the core question here is, uh, can you walk away? Can you walk your operation? Sorry, can you walk your operation from conception to sale and label every step of the way, right? All right, creating flow. Um, one of the things that I thought about here when it talks about eliminating bottlenecks that slow production, one of the first things that come to my mind was the design of our working facilities, right? Where every gate adds stress as an example, right? Shrink and labor time, or the design of the facility as an example, right? So a good design can get cattle from, you know, pasture to chute and back out to the pasture in one good smooth pass, which means less stress, better gains, fewer health events, less crew time per head, right? So the core question here would be sort of, where do cattle, people, or equipment, for farmers, stop and wait in your operation? So identifying that bottleneck. The fourth one, establishing pool. An example of this, maybe for a farmer context here. You bought a second tractor to handle the planting season demand, but that tractor sits idle 9 months of the year because the demand you built capacity for materializes for only 3 months each year, right? And so the pool system asks whether the demand is actually consistent enough to justify ownership. Or in this context, we could ask ourselves whether custom hiring covers the peak without carrying the excess of costs and overheads of owning that other tractor, right? So, core question here, if you had to rent everything you own for a season, what would you rent and what would you leave on the lot? This would be an example of identifying this pool. And the last part of lean, translated over to agriculture, is and this is where we look for feedback loops that help us audit our processes. One example that I thought of, and this was a real thing with a customer that we've dealt with, after weaning last year, death losses spiked in the first 14 days. We changed our pre-weaning protocol, vaccination protocol, adjusted our weaning pen setup, and maybe we added electrolytes to the water for the first week. With those actions, death losses dropped by half this year. So that was an example of like one small deliberate improvement that was measured and actually applied to our operations, right? So the core question here in that example is, what is the one thing that you would do differently this year than last year, and how are you going to measure whether it worked or not, right? Okay, John,
Awesome.
any,
No, I think
any
you're good.
questions there?
Yeah,
Okay,
questions from the audience here. What do we have?
I'm going to keep moving then.
Okay,
We
love it.
can we can we can definitely take questions at the end because it's probably going to go past 30 minutes on this one. It's probably going to be more like
All right.
40. Then we'll have 20 minutes for questions. All right. So one of the things that they talk about in lean is this TIMWOODS, and it's an acronym for, what you could see right there on the slide. So, the one thing to understand here is all eight of these things that I've identified in here, we all experience these at one time or another, right? Most ranchers, the good news is a lot of you have already been to RFP, right? So we already know that our operation has waste in it, but what we lack in is a systematic way to find it. And so the eight waste sort of like gives us an idea of how we map, out locating money that's already leaving our operations. It's just a little bit of a thinking process. Hiding in feed costs as an example, labor hours, death loss, repair bills. And unlike a budget cut, which reduces your capacity, eliminating waste removes costs that were never producing value in the first place, right? So this is where I'm just trying to, sort of help you think through some of that process. All right, so to keep moving, we're going to get into how we do the audit. Okay, so auditing your COGS. These are some of the things that if you're a ranch right customer, we do a lot of these things with you through various exercises. Um, so an example here in the COGS, and I will actually get into some visual examples here
Travis,
shortly. Yes.
can you kill me on COGS again? Sorry.
Yeah, I meant to bring
Yeah.
that up. Thank you, Derek. Direct cost.
Sorry. Yes, sorry about that. Direct cost, or also the acronym is cost of goods sold. So when we're looking at our P&L right below our gross product, that is the next line on our P&L there before we get to overheads, right? Gross profit at the bottom of COGS and then overheads. Okay.
Thank you, Derek.
And can I
For
interrupt,
Yes.
the
ask a
rest of you
question
that
though?
had that question and didn't ask it, you should be as good as Derek.
On,
Go ahead,
Go
Alex.
ahead.
you got labor as a cog there. Is that a different way of looking at things, or
Oh, yeah, sorry. That's a that is a that is a error there on my part. That was
okay?
supposed to go on the other slide. Thank you for
Got
pointing that out. Appreciate it. I did have John and Michaela look this over for me
Totally missed it.
and we totally missed it. So thank you. That was supposed to go on the next one for overheads right here. So thank you. Um, that's what I get for staying up late and working on this.
And having
So.
poor editors.
And poor editors. Thank you. So, all right. So, examples of things that we often find in the COGS is what I really wanted to talk to you guys about today, right? So, when we were talking about like the Tim Woods up there, so defects, as an example, would be something that we would often find in our COGS, right? So, these could be, death losses, poor outcomes of our feeding, that actually cost us real money. So, one example of this would be weaning losses, from inadequate nutrition protocols. And the problem is we paid for the cow, we paid to keep the cow alive. We paid to preg check her, and then we ended up losing the calf, right? So it lives in the gross product, and then they're in the COGS, right? Another one would be that's very easy for people to associate with is like poor average daily gain. As an example, on cattle that you're backgrounding or feeding, right? So we're feeding, for days and days and days, sometimes months, and those aren't converting to pounds, as an example. Sometimes in the crop world, this could have been like bad seed selection or bad soil prep. We spent the inputs and the yield didn't achieve, right? Another one that lives in the COGS often is, overproduction. We see that a lot in cattle feeding, as an example, going over the optimal harvest weight. We often see that in hay. We grow more hay than we can use or sell sometimes, right? Custom, let's see, anything that would be like associated with volume is a good example of that, right? Inventory waste is one of them that we often find in COGS. We might have And this one would live in the gross product as well, right? We have excess feed inventory that we bought in bulk. Um, this one's also going to sit on the cash statement as well. So you're understanding how we have to understand where these live in the statements, right? We've got cash tied up when we have too much inventory, right? And it may spoil or shrink. One of them, farming specific in inventory, is we could have chemicals, seed, or fertilizer that we purchased ahead of need, sitting in storage, and we don't use it, or it sits there for too long, right? Would be an example. So now, there's a double side to this coin with lean. We do have to understand, like in farming, as an example, the people that bought in early last year on diesel, fertilizer, et cetera, right? Regardless of the inventory or cash consequences of that, are going to, set themselves up much better than those that did not. So,
Just
auditing, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, one thing I think that when you go back to that slide a little bit there,
Yes,
Travis, is I think sometimes we get too hung up on uh, average daily gains when I think a better measure is
sure,
to look at it on a cost per day because I mean the cost per day is more fits the cost to keep mindset,
absolutely.
etc. So that's one because I mean we're not really probably weighing our critters, etc. to get that, and there's the handle of stress and all that. But if you see that, if you watch it over time, that's a very good measure. I think that we can. And I mean, it sends flags, to you earlier.
Yes, absolutely. Totally glad you brought that up. One of the examples I give shortly is cost to keep on, how we actually apply these things in real life. So
Yeah,
excellent example. Yeah.
yeah, another piece of that is I think it also forces us to keep our head days, uh, which then, you can see things pop out from, with your inventory management.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Very good examples. So, when we get to auditing our overheads, and we will be looking at some real world examples of each of these overheads and COGS here in just a moment. If we go back to the Tim Woods, some of the things that live here in the overheads, motion is one of the things that we often look at. A good example of this in the livestock business is water systems that require, daily manual checking. I mean, how many of us have driven for days and days checking water? And the reality is we could set up some automated monitoring. The technology's there to do that. Maybe this is a direct to consumer business where delivery routes that aren't optimized, right? We're putting in extra miles, extra time, extra fuel. Okay. Waiting. This could be crew waiting on parts for a down piece of equipment. Cattle waiting on a vet that is late maybe or 3 hours out, right? Irrigation water scheduling gaps that we may have, right? Fields waiting, crop stress, yield impacts, all the things that come with that. Skills, one of the things that we often underestimate, when we ask ourselves that question. I had several conversations with our clients yesterday and today about, are we getting the return on the skills that we've invested in? In other words, the people that we've invested in, right? Is that showing up on the top line revenue, or is that something we need to address, right? So these things are real and they translate to agriculture. Um, So, what does this look like in reality, right? Like, let's bring it back home and understand like how we actually analyze these things and how we put them uh, into practice, right? So, when it comes to benchmarks, we're all very familiar with benchmarks. I'm gonna bump through this slide here in just a second, but I just want you to understand that benchmarking is critical because it's going to tell us whether we are improving or not, whether those are internal or external benchmarks. They are basically helping us understand our level of effectiveness as a business manager. Okay, so one of the ways that we do this, as an example, and I've done this with a number of our clients, is we take your information from the P&L and we break it into benchmarks and we understand those changes over time. Those could be in the COGS, right? If you look at this specific example, in 2023, sitting at 56.6% gross profit margin. Through the increase in gross product, slight increase in gross product, I will say, over to 2025. But really, this was good cost control in the COGS. We have a gross profit margin of 65%. That's a 10, almost a little bit more than 10% improvement, or I'm sorry, a little bit less than 10% improvement within a 3-year period. The good news is too, we didn't see labor or any of the overheads here change dramatically. If you look at the change between the years here, these are very slight changes, which results in bottom increase in bottom line profitability. We go from 2.3% to 4.6. That's literally 100% increase in net income. Okay. So that's an example of how controlling the COGS and the overheads and analyzing that. One of the things that we also do is break this into quarters. Really depends on your context for your business. The cool thing is too, you can actually do this with QBO when you're in QuickBooks for the people that are our clients. You can simply do it with a P&L and looking at the percent of income. It's just a real simple drop down that you can do in QuickBooks. And there's probably some great videos online showing you exactly how to do that. So another one that Walter brought up, which I was very happy to hear, and we work on this a lot with our clients, is analyzing cost to keep. And it's a real tangible way of getting into the COGS and the overheads and understanding and benchmarking ourselves against our own business. Are we improving? Are we not? How do we compare against others in the industry? So, like, as an example, if I can go get custom grazing for $2.50, right, somewhere else, how does that compare to my cost to keep at home? Well, this particular example, their cost to keep is very reasonable compared to what they could pay someone else to do it, right? So that's a great way to say, hey, here's my target. I want to be under that target consistently or improving it, whatever the goal might be, right? This has real implications in our business here, monitoring this type of thing. Questions on those two? Am I going too fast, John?
What
No,
is
you're good.
the fourth column there, the ads? Is that just the math part
Oh,
of it?
thank you. That's animal days. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, that's
Thank you.
animal days. So one of the critical components of calculating cost to keep is time, right? So converting everything over to animal days is a critical part of that. Time and what type of animal it was, animal unit, right? So, okay. So let's keep moving through this. This is just a header there. I wanted to get into controls a little bit. And give you some examples of internal and external controls. And then I'm going to bring everything back together and then we'll take questions as you have them. Um, one example or several examples of internal controls. So, like approval thresholds. Maybe I'm a CEO and I've got an order buyer out there that's working for me, right? An approval threshold would be an example of any livestock purchase, would require a review against, or and I'm sorry, not the order buyer, but the manager of my operations, right? Like if he's wanting to buy more livestock and stock the ranch up, it's going to require a review against the cash flow plan before we commit to that, right? So we need to make sure we've got either the cash or liquidity, through some kind of mechanism there to pay for those cattle, right? So in other words, the point there on approval thresholds, with that example is we're not just going to go sit in the sale barn and buy on impulse without checking our cash or liquidity positions first. Okay, as an example of that. For some of us in the room, purchase orders is a big deal, particularly in the crop world or direct consumer space, right? Where we are, we are committing to buy animals, almost a whole year in advance, right? So this is just a really simple process, that could be, it could be listed in the shop, or it could be a document that we sign with our vendors, right? It can be a wide range of things there. One of the things that we do for internal controls as well, this is in the cash planning tool that we utilize with a lot of our clients, is a monthly budget to actual review, right? And when we look at these things, an example may be, our feed costs running 15% above budget in March. And if so, it gets caught in March, not in December later that year, right? So that's why budget reviews are important. Capitalization rules. Main thing I wanted y'all to understand there as far as internal controls is just clarity, so costs don't get buried. And what I mean by that, like, is I often see with people that we don't understand what should be expensed on the P&L and what should be capitalized. And so one of the things with internal controls is making sure that we understand that water lines and fencing are two of the most common ones that we see. As an example, in a water line itself is a capex, capital asset, right? A broken valve to repair that water line is a real expense that goes on the P&L, right? So this is where like that financial literacy piece on the operator's part becomes critical. And without clear rules and understanding, they tend to get really mixed up, and it can distort our P&L in real ways, right? If we don't review it properly. Um, External controls. This is a big one at the moment. It's one of the reasons that we had this presentation today, right? Fuel in particular. Like, I mean, when you're buying $100,000 worth of fuel annually, pennies literally matter, right? So this is where getting a competitive quote for the contract is really critical. And I can think of a lot of other things: fertilizer, hay, feed, trucking. I mean, the list goes on, right? And it's one of the things that we don't do very well in agriculture. We tend to be like, well, I've got a great relationship with Joe, and he's going to give me the best deal for sure, right? And those relationships are awesome. They're meaningful, but we probably should shop a little harder sometimes, particularly in times like this.
We might
Market
need to
price.
know what questions we should be asking Joe, right? Like sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Can we do a little better?
Yeah. What's his margins, right? Does he have some room here? Sometimes we don't ask and we don't get, you know. If we don't ask, we don't get, is one of the things that I've learned. So, market price alerts, that's one of them where, particularly for, our crowd today in the sell by marketing, right? This is where that's important, where we watch that market, we buy strategically. That could be for somebody that's feeding cattle, right? Corn and soybean meal price alerts. So you're not buying feed on the dips, or so that you are buying feed on the dips. I apologize. Not at the point when you need them and you've already run out, right? How often do we have those problems? Um, and then what I meant on the third party benchmarking, an example there is the cost to keep is a great example of that, right? Are you spending $1.75 an animal unit per day or $4, right? Like we have to know our cost to keep annually, and we have to understand what other people are what their cost to keep is so that we can compare it against industry norms, right? And one of the best ways to do that is say, hey, what are people charging for custom grazing and custom feeding, right? That's an easy one to see, to benchmark ourselves against. Um, the one thing that I will say there is when it comes to benchmarking, something that just came to my mind was, if you're going to establish an external benchmark, make sure that you're doing it against peer operations of similar size and type, and not against, like, if I have 100 cows, I'm going to benchmark myself against somebody that's running 5,000 cows as an example, right? Because those benchmarks are going to look very different. All right, so how do we bring this all back together? All right, so it's sort of what we've laid out here. it is sort of this four-step framework, right? So let's think back to lean, right? Categorize. This is your team of reports here where this is speaking. Do you understand how each one of those functions and what it means? This is financial literacy. We push this really hard at Ranch Right. When we go back to lean, this is where we define value. What does the market pay you for? And are your costs aligned to producing what it's paying you for? This is where mapping the value stream comes into play, right? Like which of these steps are adding value and which are necessary, which are pure waste that we talked about, right? Benchmarking. This is turning your P&L, balance sheet, cash into actionable decision-making tools, right? This is where in lean, creating flow, okay, we're eliminating the bottlenecks that are impeding production or adding cost, okay? All right, third one, controls. We review what we are spending. Are we spending on the things that the market is demanding or is required? And this is in lean where we establish pool. We only spend and produce what the demand is requiring, right? For our buyer. Monitor. This is our path to improvement. This is Kaizen, right? This is monitoring and revisiting it and making improvements. Okay? So, what does that do on the team of reports here? Bringing it back full circle. P&L, gross profit's going to improve if I work on this stuff. Net income grows, right? That's what we are here to do is those two things on the P&L. Balance sheet, we're going to build equity. We're going to reduce liabilities over time, right? Because we've got more cash. We've got more cash to do those things. We've got more cash to reinvest. We have more cash to pay down our liabilities and make those decisions, not letting the market make those decisions for us. Cash flow, operating cash improves. And then we decide what we get to do with it, going back over to the balance sheet, right? So that's how it all kind of circles back together and why these things matter. So, goes without being said, the ranches that come out of this cycle in the best shape will not be the ones that waited to do these things. We pushed that really hard with our clients, and I think it goes without being said. The thing is we need to remind ourselves of how to do that, right? So, John, that's all I have for the presentation there.
That's awesome. Very good. Okay, let's take some questions. Let me give a quick thought. We have talked multiple times in this webinar, on the podcast, and other venues about the need to, the business that has a big advantage is the one that has more of its dollars actually working to generate, profit or cash flow explicitly. And I think one of the things that comes from this type of discussion and the things that Travis is talking about is, again, are your dollars going out aligned with your values, and are they aligned with the actual production process of your business? It's a pretty easy thing to think about theoretically. I think all of us understand that it is more difficult to chase down dollar by dollar. Are we actually doing that? So we go back to thinking about our money as an army that is either working for us or working against us, or just sort of sitting on the sidelines. And we want as much of that army as possible working for us. Very good. Thoughts, questions?
Well, John and Travis, I mean, one of the things, I mean, we've spent a lot of focus on cost of goods, but I think that sometimes the overhead piece, I mean, I think you got to look at all of it in the process, because when you get into the overheads, lots of times what you're seeing is, I call it, you can manage the debits, is I guess what I'm trying to say, from the process, because as you reduce the overheads, and I'm not saying that, I mean, there's a point where overheads work for you, but
Correct.
but
Right.
you're also, what you're doing is you're increasing that profit margin, so your ROA goes up. So I mean, that's one piece that you got to be,
Huge piece.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's one piece you got to be cognizant of too, because
Yep.
gross margin is a part. I mean, big picture when you're looking at turnover, that's one piece of it, but you also got to be looking at your profit margin.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Great point, Walter. Good.
Yep.
All right. Other thoughts?
Hey,
How
hey,
many of you
Travis,
find? Go ahead.
I got a question. Can you go back and talk about Tim Woods and how you apply that? I got it. It's a great list, but how do you think about that in terms of what you just talked about?
Yeah, this is where we think about how we are mapping, how, like locating that money that's already leaving your operation, like where it may be hiding. And unlike cutting the budget, that helps us, basically because if we just cut budgets, we just reduce capacity, right? And so the Tim Woods, I didn't get time to go into it in great detail. But these are the things where lean has taught us. These are the eight main components within our business, right? The eight main things within all businesses where we find waste. These are the eight, right? And these are the things that we look at in the P&L, like labor, right? They just identify it as skills, right? So that's just one of the many examples, right? Transportation, a big one for a lot of people is trucking in the COGS or fuel in the overheads, right? So that's all that practice is there in the eight wastes is just a methodology for helping identify and map those into our financial statements. Yeah,
And one of the things that's great in this list, Eileen, is, inventory is something that is a big cost that a lot of people, for example, don't think
that's
about.
right.
Toyota was great to really innovate in that space. And, this is where some of the other things that lean is referred to, just-in-time manufacturing, Toyota, Walmart, all of these companies that have been able to streamline their supply chain have been able to prevent themselves from holding large amounts of inventory, which effectively waste money in the organization. When we look at direct consumer businesses that have lower, inventory days, higher inventory turnover, those have a natural advantage in terms of profitability and ROA.
Another piece there that I mean this applies probably in the the clients that has some crops in the deal. You can say I would think, Travis, that the over application of the
Great.
nitrogen, I'm just
Yep.
picking on
Yep.
nitrogen as an example.
Yep,
I mean, everybody wants to go for yield where they're not looking at the margins. Um, uh,
that's right.
and and then a lot of the universities go with they do I say price of corn and price of anhydrous when they're not really looking at even the form of the nitrogen that they should be using and when they're applying it. So anyway,
Yeah,
the other
yeah.
one,
I mean,
go ahead, excuse me.
no, it's a great thought process. I mean, like, I think literally all of us could put this list in front of us and probably write dozens of things into each one of these categories where we could find improvements within our own operations, and we could easily map those to our statements, right?
Right.
And the thing to remember, like, Sam Walton, John brought up the Walmart example, like he was super famous for, and some of y'all on this call have heard me say this. He was super famous for going to each of his store managers every single year and saying, I want you to find 5%, 5% in the expenses somewhere in the P&L here to save money in your store this year, right? And he just hammered that into people, that among many other things, right? Like Walmart literally built their business on saving costs because every dollar that they saved was a dollar that they could literally save for their customers too, right? It was a dollar less that they could charge effectively, or 75 cents less, right? Of that dollar that they could charge to their customers, right? So they literally built their business model on that, just cost saving.
Yeah, and I like how you've presented this, Travis, because what you're doing is you're doing a piece of it where you're customer focused and what you're trying to do. Okay, which is a huge deal. Where I'm going to go in the weeds or kind of go off the reservation here a little bit. But one of the things I think our universities do, they've forgotten who their customer is. As an
Right.
example, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Bingo.
it's not internally, with all the grants that they get. It's the students and that's our society.
Yep. That's a great example.
Awesome stuff. Good. What else?
Oh, hello?
Yes.
Hey, I'm still, I know Travis and I have talked about this a little bit. I'm wondering if anybody out there has thoughts on the transportation side of things. Trucks, I know, John, you've had it in your ranchonomics, having trucks for every one cheap truck for every job as opposed to one good one for doing it all. That is our biggest expense by far. I said I've got a brand new truck that's a year and a half old and it's miled out already. We're just spread so far out where we're at. It's just, I mean, it's inevitable, the miles that we have to put on. So I'm just thinking of asking if somebody has an equation that breaks it down for me. I guess I'm just looking for a little bit better of an answer.
Yeah.
Leasing, owning one good truck as opposed to 3 or 4 cheaper trucks that do, one for every job kind of a thing.
Yeah, an example of something that I've done with a customer is I built an equity calculator. This is a particular client that has a hotshot business, and they have, I think, 9 trucks. And one of it's a huge expense for them, the repairs and maintenance, the fuel bills, et cetera, right? Just like you're saying. And one of the things that we need to understand between the leasing and ownership is if we're going to own it, where does that where does it make sense to trade that truck in? Like, how do we make the best decisions there? Like, when do these repair and maintenance bills add up? Right. So we built like an equity calculator that allows them to put in there the number of miles that they're putting on average per year, and then the estimated blue book value of that vehicle. So that it helps them understand, like, okay, I'm either putting on so many miles, I'm burning equity here. That would be an indication of, like, you know what, we need to probably look at leasing, right? Um,
Okay.
or you know what, I'm only putting on 10,000 miles per year, and this truck is actually building a lot of equity. But guess what? 4 of the others are doing the same thing. And do I really need 4 trucks that I'm building equity into, or am I better taking that capital out of those vehicles and utilizing it somewhere else in my business that's getting better returns, right?
Are
So
you factoring the tax benefit of leasing over owning into that as well? Or
could very well, yeah. I'm not sure what your tax laws are in Canada, but yeah, as
we get
far
a
as that goes.
bit of a write-off?
Yeah,
Leasing
the
over
danger
owning?
I have with the leasing thing is I often can't stay in the mileage and other parameters
That's my
sort of
problem
laid
as
out.
well,
Yeah.
100%.
So
Well,
I
and John,
haven't.
you
Go
you've
ahead.
always lived in the middle of nowhere, kind of, right? Basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so when they give you you can, I think I want to say one of them was like 12,000 miles a year that I looked at, and it was like, that's a freaking pipe dream. I've had to own 5 trucks, or at least 5 trucks to stay within
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
The other, of course, is just the type of usage. Sometimes they are specific about what they do and don't want you to do. As soon as you go to drill through the bed and put a fifth wheel ball in, they get excited. So
Right.
I haven't gone down the lease road for that, but there can be tax advantages if the other parts of the contract process and the lease make sense. We see trucking companies all over the world that lease trucks, right? We see delivery companies that lease trucks. Like, it is absolutely a viable option, I think, in this world. Walter, do you have other thoughts about that? I know you've looked at some of those types of things.
I'm probably more in an ownership camp, probably. And you're right, John. Is that um, you're paying for that privilege of the leasing, and the numbers I've always kind of ran.
Yeah.
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 But I want to go. Hang
Yeah,
on, Travis. Let me go to the central point of this. I could easily own a truck that would cost me, not worth, but cost
Right.
me $50,000 more than the one I'm currently driving. Like that would not be hard. The question I have is my money better spent in 50,000 of truck investment, or am I better off to go buy, 13 more cows or whatever that number is?
Right.
And have cash flow come from those. And I'm going to tell you, for me personally, I am pretty strict about I want to spend money and I want to write checks for things that are going to write checks back. And a pickup, I make no money with a pickup. I have to have one, right? I mean, I got to get, and I don't drive a piece of junk. Like I have a clean, very functional pickup, but it is not a big sink for cash that I could be using other places.
Yeah, John, I mean, I always like what Alan Nation always said, rust, rot, and depreciate.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
When we talk about that, and a lot of you in your end of year reports have seen the Kiyosaki ratio, right? If you have a low Kiyosaki ratio, it is just hard to have a high ROA. If you have a high Kiyosaki ratio, and remember that's the number of assets or the dollar value of assets you own that generate cash flow versus those that don't. There are some businesses that absolutely require you to own things that don't generate income. But the more that you can own that generates income, just the easier your life is.
Yep.
And look, some people have a much greater affection for pickups than I do. I really don't care. Some people really love them, and that's important to them. Like, great, knock yourself out. That's fantastic. It's not high on my list.
Well, I guess, yeah, I guess, there's a bunch of other costs that said if ours break down, Travis, you knew it, said we just had a
100%. Yep.
We're in the process of delivering bulls. And so
Right.
Problem.
when a truck breaks
Yes.
down where I can't get rid of these bulls and I'm still paying to have them fed, not to mention the cost of having the truck broke down, it gets pretty surmountable as well. So
Yep.
I guess
totally agree.
Yeah. Just a lot of.
I will tell you, I have been stranded 0 times by my pickup. So, and that's important for the reason
Right.
that if I'm looking at the cost of depreciation versus what I spend on repair and maintenance, my repair and maintenance spend is, probably bigger than average on that pickup, but there's 0 depreciation. And when I look at the two compared, my number's still smaller.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I can also argue that my repair and maintenance is deductible. so that part
true.
does count for taxes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, sorry, Travis, I interrupted you. I think you had more to say on that.
No, I think this just goes back to the core question, right? Like, what is this
Yes.
returning, and is that return acceptable, right? For you, Dan, that's a different question, right, than it is for John, right? It has a different meaning, to it in regards to delivering bulls. Good example.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
Awesome. More questions, more thoughts. Well, if there are none, I'm going to ask you a couple. Go ahead. Yeah. Go ahead, Betsy.
I was just wondering about the cost to keep. When you asked that
Great
question,
question.
I was like, I wonder if we really know what ours is. Would you look at it by class of livestock? Probably, correct?
Yeah, we typically break it down into class of livestock so that we understand it for each one of those.
Okay.
So we would take that class off your P&L and then divide the overheads based on the animal days, or what I've started to use is standard animal days, and get it a little more nailed down, and then we would allocate the overheads based on the percentages of the animal days on your operation. Yep. So yes.
That's the one place where I think we advocate strongly for allocating overheads. That said, it has all of the same problems that allocating overheads in other areas does.
Correct.
You have to do some guessing, and that guessing is you're doing your best there. So there is always going to be some slop in that number.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Good. All right, let's if there are no other questions, let's wrap up. I've got a couple of quick questions for some of you that I don't know that I'd love to ask where you're from. But if you haven't already, please tune in and subscribe to the Ranchonomics podcast. Check out our YouTube channel where this webinar and others, this one will be posted. We have years worth of them that are on there. Please, check out Alex's podcast, check out ranching.fyi and the forums. We do a weekly financial Q&A in there. And then this is our first Thursday of the month. No, this is our third Thursday of the month webinar, which is about fundamentals of financials. Our first Thursday of the month is their Building a Better Business webinar. So tune in on the same link for those. They are also at 2 Mountain. Podcast drops every week on Tuesday. And with that, I've got a couple of questions. So, for example, Tara Morris, where are you from and how'd you find us? Rob V, I'm not sure I know who you are. I think I know everybody. Wiley Galt, that may be another one I don't know. I'd love to hear where you're from and how you got here.
Sure. I am just a big podcast fan. And I went through a possible onboarding with Mimi last year. Maybe that's how I got on the email list. My husband and I ranch in Louisiana, South Louisiana, so it's extremely green here. Absolutely no snow, maybe in 3 years. So, but we're really big fans, and both of us have started digging into the podcast and really applying some principles in the past year or two. So we haven't dug into Ranch Right accounting particularly, but we're trying to get closer.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Okay. Rob V, thanks. I appreciate that. Tara, appreciate that. Who is the other one that I didn't recognize? Rob V. Wiley Galt, are you available to talk?
Yeah. I'm from Martinsdale, Montana. Discovered your podcast as my mom actually sent it to me, as we had a good family friend and a young mother pass away from brain cancer.
Oh,
And she passed on some of the thinking ones that you had in the mind, and discovered it from there. Just signed up for my first sim, so trying to eat up as much information as I can.
Awesome. Very, very good. Awesome. All right. Anybody else we don't know? I'm trying to think. Everybody else's name looks familiar. So, Hondo, good to see you, buddy. It's been a while. Hope you're plenty warm down there. I'm assuming Evan is Evan Gunthrop, but I should ask.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it was Evan.
Crazy
Yeah.
big guy in Indiana.
There you go. Yeah. All right. Just wanted to make sure. Great. Well, it's nice to see all of you. Appreciate you coming, and have a wonderful couple of weeks. We will see you on the first Thursday in May for our Building a Better Business webinar. So thanks for coming. And Travis, great job. Really good. I hope all of you can see, real quick final thought. I hope all of you can see how great our team is. Travis has been a wonderful addition. He's been with us just a little over a year now. He and Michaela have added so much to our team. It has been fantastic. I am very excited every day to get to work with these guys. Chelsea Waters made a great comment to me the other day while we were on the phone, and she said, man, 5 years ago, this was all a dream. And here we are living it. So it's been fun.
Thank you,
Awesome.
guys.
Yeah.
All right, be good. We'll talk soon. Okay,
See you
bye.
soon.
Thanks.